Before Helloween became legends and power metal took over Europe and eventually the world, there was Walls of Jericho. So, in honor of its 40th anniversary, let's talk about its history, discuss some strange things about it, and then discuss why this underrated gem is actually one of the most important albums of the 1980s. Here you go. Super quick, as always guys, please do not hesitate to comment on anything you hear or see in this video, and especially if you disagree with me, because the whole point of our Metal Pilgrim channel is of course to start a conversation. But alright, let's do it! By 1985, speed metal wasn't exactly a brand new idea. I mean, you had bands flirting with velocity for a while now, inspired by Riot's Warrior or Rainbow's Kill the King, early signs that heavy metal could be both fast and melodic. And then, of course, came the new wave of British heavy metal, which simply flooded Europe with adrenaline, with such masters as Iron Maiden, Saxon, Raven, or Angel Witch. And naturally, most of the bands that appeared in the 1980s were inspired by those guys. But it wasn't exactly the case for Helloween. As guitarist Kai Hansen remembered, he himself was a huge fan of earlier bands from the 1970s, such as Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Slade, or Judas Priest. And in addition to that, both he and the rest of the boys whom we know today as Helloween did not shy away from German schlagers or such cult bands as ABBA. And yeah, you heard that right. While everyone else was riffing on Sabbath, these guys were vibing to Swedish pop hooks and German sing-along melodies, which would eventually help them reshape heavy metal into something that would simply change this genre forever. And it is exactly that wild blend of influences that made Walls of Jericho sound like nothing else at that time. It fused the melody of pop with the aggression of metal, creating something completely fresh. And it is thanks to them that this strange mix of heaviness, speed, and catchiness would soon get its own name: power metal. But if we're being very honest, it wasn't only Kai Hansen, Michael Wyckoff, Markus Groskopf, and Ingo Schwichtenberg who were responsible for this new and exciting sound on the Helloween's debut, as every revolution needs its mad scientist, and for Walls of Jericho it was actually someone who stayed in the dark: Harris Jones. Born in 1950 to an American serviceman and a German mother, Harris had one foot in punk and the other in pure chaos. By the mid-80s, he was the in-house producer of Noise Records, the label which, by the way, pretty much built the entire German metal scene from the ground up. And actually, right before Helloween, he had already produced Heavy Metal Breakdown by Grave Digger, another cornerstone of that new loud generation from Germany. And so in April of 1985, when Helloween were not even thinking about Walls of Jericho yet, and were about to release their debut EP, it was Harris Jones whom they brought in for that job. And Jones instantly got them. He understood that what the boys were doing wasn't just faster than pretty much anything else released in Germany at that time. It was simply different. And he helped them capitalize on that difference. And so when the time has finally come to record and release their first full-length studio album, it was simply a no-brainer that Harris Jones would help them out with that task. And if you ask me, he did that on A+. As what Harris Jones was able to do was to capture that energy of the early Helloween perfectly on Walls of Jericho. Guitars so raw and loud they practically melt the tape, yet somehow still melodic and precise. And even decades later, after working with gazillion bands post-1985, Jones still calls Walls of Jericho one of his proudest works. And rightfully so, as it didn't just define Helloween sound, but rather defined how this new and exciting genre called power metal would feel for years to come. In case you guys didn't know, the title for Helloween's debut album, Walls of Jericho, comes straight from the Bible. The story where the Israelites marched around the fortified city of Jericho until its mighty walls crumbled from the sound of their horns. Which, for the record, in my opinion, is one of the most metal stories ever. And you know what? It is actually a perfect metaphor for what Helloween did in 1985. They blew down the old walls of heavy metal with the sound alone, loud, fast, and unstoppable, yet at the same time went a completely different route from the thrash metal bands of that time. And instead of simply doubling down on both speed and aggression, they put everything they had on melody and catchiness while still playing heavy metal faster than 99% of the bands around the world. And then there was, of course, a cover art from Uwe and Eda Karczewski, a husband and wife duo who would later on go on to create both Keeper of the Seven Keys covers as well, featuring a monstrous pumpkin-headed creature smashing through city walls that was able to perfectly capture both the biblical legend and the band's sound and style, and would basically define early Helloween's identity. As the thing is that Walls of Jericho was still somewhat of a Frankenstein, somewhere in between the early speed metal and the power metal as we know today, which Helloween would later on propagate on their second and third studio albums. And this album artwork was actually just like that. Half horror, half mysterious fairy tale, eventually becoming somewhat of a bridge to the visual style which pretty much the entire power metal scene of Europe would adopt in the early 90s. Walls of Jericho wasn't polished, it wasn't pretty, and maybe to some fans it wasn't exactly perfect, but at the same time it was revolutionary. Eduardo Rivadavia of AllMusic called it a cornerstone of 80s metal. And he's absolutely right, as it bridged the gap between the reckless speed of early thrash and the melodic precision which would later on define power metal. At that time, maybe only Iron Maiden played with that level of harmony and imagination, but Helloween cranked the tempo way past the red line. Songs like Ride the Sky and Phantoms of Death were faster, wilder, and somehow still packed with those unforgettable melodies that simply got stuck in your head for days. And it was the blueprint, the style which eventually would launch hundreds of imitators. And while, yes, in all honesty, Walls of Jericho wasn't exactly perfect, and maybe on it Helloween did not really find their style to the fullest just yet. But the truth is that without Walls of Jericho, there would simply not have been the Keeper of the Seven Keys. There would simply be no Blind Guardian, no Gamma Ray, or no Dragon Force. And there's a very high chance that there would not be a genre we call today power metal. And so if you ask me, the whole idea that the vast majority of the songs from this record were absolutely ignored by Helloween for years is simply a crime against humanity. And I'm very happy that some of those forgotten classics have finally found their ways on a Helloween live stage on this tour. But anyways, what do you guys personally think about Walls of Jericho, and would you like me to release more videos about Helloween in the future? Please let us know in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!